I have a feeling this might be a little pixelated. So I really hope it's not. But I noticed that when I move this way, my screen gets weird. So if I wander and ramble, or I look completely frozen, hi Lily, it's nice to see you. If I wander or ramble, um, or I look like totally frozen, hi Geneva, or I look totally frozen, it's because I'm afraid it's pixelated. And if I get too pixelated, please someone tell me in the comments that you can't see my beautiful face because I look really good today, and I would be sad. So I'm really, really happy to have you here. We have been in California for like what feels like 100 days, but it was more like 8. But it was like the longest week ever of my life. And so I'm really happy to be back in Oregon where it's raining, and I'm so happy it's raining. And the trees are green, even though it's wintertime, and it's pretty. And I'm just really happy to be back in Oregon. So, thank you for joining my Facebook Live today, where I'm gonna raise a little bit of hell, and because it's Fuck Shit Up Friday, and I love Fuck Shit Up Friday. And I was thinking on the drive home, because it's the longest drive on earth, what I was going to talk about on Fuck Shit Up Friday, and I was like, well, I could talk about Donald Trump's new book, and I could talk about some of the news that happened over the week, and I could, or not Donald Trump's new book, but that book about Donald Trump. I know he didn't write a book because that would be funny. But anyway, talk about that book, or talk about what like Sarah Huckabee Sanders said about if we don't believe in him, then we're all just a bunch of crazy lunatics. Which fine, okay, I'll take the crazy lunatic. I'll be that. And so, so anyway, I was trying to think of all these things, and then Jeff Sessions undermined all of the work that Obama did regarding the marijuana industry and the legalization of marijuana. And so I thought to myself, well, I'm totally opposed to the legalization of marijuana. And so maybe I should talk about that, because most people make this assumption with Dr. Melissa Bird, PhD, that since I'm a liberal and I'm one of those liberals, that probably I'm completely in support of the legalization of marijuana. And I'm not. I am not at all. You might be thinking that maybe the reason I'm opposed is because I have watched addiction, particularly the use of marijuana, rip out the hearts of my 3 kids that I'm helping to raise, of the 3 kids I help raise. Or maybe it's because you assume that, I'm this Utah girl, so I'm probably a prude because I don't agree with smoking marijuana or doing drugs. Or maybe it's the increase in emergency room visits in Colorado since kids have started getting a hold of their parents' brownies and their cookies, and they're eating them, and then they're getting sick because they're eating too much marijuana because they're kids. Or potentially you just think I'm a heartless asshole who needs to catch up with the times and get up with the rest of the world and realize that marijuana is a safe drug and everything's going to be fine and it's the greatest thing that's ever happened since sliced bread. But to all of those things, I'm going to tell you the answer is absolutely that's none of the things. So the reason, and I've taken all these notes, so I have to organize my notes a little bit here. So because I really don't want to get off track because I tend to ramble about this topic a lot. And when I am teaching women how to engage in revolutionary acts, and when I am teaching students how to engage in revolutionary acts, I like to teach them how to tap into their passion because I think it's really important and critical. And so here's what I am very passionate about. And I am passionate about not legalizing marijuana for a couple of reasons. I really oppose it because it's a racist, sexist institution. The legalization of marijuana is run by a handful of white, wealthy men who stand to make over $50 billion a year by 2026. Now, let me just slow that number down for y'all again. A handful of white men are going to be making, because they need to, apparently they don't make enough money, $50 billion a year by 2026. I do not make $50 billion a year. Let's be really clear. I'm not sure why more white men need to make $50 billion a year. Let's be really clear. So here's some fun facts for you. Hi, Nikki. It's nice to see you. I'm so happy you're here. You came just in time because I'm starting on my rant. So in states where marijuana is legal, you are not allowed to sell marijuana if you have a felony on your record. Okay? So in states where marijuana is legal, you are not allowed to sell marijuana if you have a felony on your record. In states where marijuana is legal, you have to have capital to invest in the market where the money is being made. So you have to have money to buy your pot shop and sell your dope, okay? Because in places like Colorado, there is a company in particular, and I will get to that, where all of the, like 90% of the marijuana is sold from, right? And so you have this industry that until just a couple of years ago was an underground industry that was done in secret. And there's a really great article I'm going to link to on my blog about this, where small-time drug dealers or even big-time drug dealers were growing weed. But what's happening in these states where we've legalized marijuana is that small-time drug dealers are locked out of the market, which leaves them competing with some of the richest, most well-funded capitalists and lobbyists in the country. Like, think for just a minute, the most well-funded lobbyists as well-funded as the tobacco industry, if not more well-funded. The fact that Utah was considering legalizing marijuana should tell you all how deep the pockets of these billionaires goes. This is not your, hi Mel, how are you? I'm so glad you're here. I knew you were going to get on for this one. This is not the selling of marijuana that was going on in the 80s or the 90s or even earlier in the last 20 years. So if you are not funded enough to get into the market and break into the market, and you're a small-time drug dealer, it's really complicated for you to get into the market. So never mind that Black folks, like African-American people and people of color, are 4 times likely than whites to be arrested for marijuana possession, even though they use marijuana at the same rates. So people of color, and the ACLU has a great slideshow about this that I'm going to link in the blog that says that Blacks are 4 times as likely as whites, 4 times more likely than whites to be arrested for marijuana possession, even though they use marijuana at the same rate as white people. Never mind that in Colorado, the average rate of THC is 18%, whereas in 1988, yes, Mel, it is about Sessions' personal investment in the private prison industry, but I'm not talking about Jeff Sessions. I am literally only talking about the marijuana industry. That's all I'm talking about. In 1988, the THC level of marijuana was 3%, and now the average rate is somewhere around 18%, and it's always, for the most part, higher than 8%. And so nobody knows what happens to the brain when you're using THC at that level. And I'm not talking about oil, and I'm not talking about using it for medicinal purposes. I'm talking about daily use, as I'm seeing here in Oregon, and I have seen in other places where it's legal. So, and early research shows that paranoid delusion can be heightened when THC is at that toxic level. It's a toxic level. It's not a safe level. And no one knows what that's going to do to the brain long term. So as a social worker, I cannot support an industry that is created to keep some of the most skilled drug dealers poor, imprisoned, and out of the market. Let me be really clear here. I am opposed to the legalization of marijuana as long as this system is created to keep some of the greatest drug dealers in the world poor, imprisoned, and out of the market. While white men make billions of dollars and potentially trillions of dollars, if we're talking $50 billion a year, $50 billion a year. Out of the market, while white men make billions and potentially trillions off their customers. All of those men in prison for selling weed should be released immediately. Tomorrow, as soon as California legalized marijuana, they should have released every single person of color who was in prison for dealing drugs. Every single one. And Mel, send me the data. Send me the data that contradicts the toxicity theory. Send it to me and I will link it on my website. I'm not going to argue about that one, okay? If you're right, I know you work in healthcare. Give me the data. I'm not going to argue about that one if you've got the proof, because I didn't see it the whole entire time I've been Googling the last 24 hours. Okay? I'm with you. I'm not trying to argue about that. I have a really big, huge problem with Black people being kept in prison and Latino people being kept in prison, while these 8 men, see these guys? See them? They run the largest marijuana grower industry in the world. See them? Do you see any women? I don't see any women. Do you see any Black people? I don't see any Black people. Do you see any Latino people? Nope. No people of color there. 8 men making $50 billion a year. That's super problematic. Super duper big, huge. So, as long as a law is being passed in a state where we are legalizing marijuana, I don't care if it's Colorado, I don't care if it's Utah, I don't care if it's Nevada, I don't care if it's Rhode Island, I don't care if it's DC, I don't care if it's Washington, Oregon, California, I don't give a shit where in the nation marijuana is being legalized. If those states, hi Courtney, how are you? If those states do not have a provision in place to immediately release from prison every single person who has been arrested for selling weed, with expungement of their records and restitution for lost wages, then we are living a hypocrisy, an absolute hypocrisy. And what we are doing is funding the pockets of 8 white men who own American, which is the largest grower of marijuana in the country. And as long as we are continuing to fund their pockets without letting people out of prison who are doing the same exact thing and not offering them shares in American, which is the largest cannabis grower in the country, in the world, and given a shop on Rodeo Drive so they can make their money back, then we are living a hypocrisy. And we can't do that. As a leader in the social justice community and as a social worker, I cannot support the prison industrial complex by supporting the legalization of marijuana. And that is exactly what we are doing. Because if the laws in place do not support the release of people and the expungement of their records because they cannot buy into the marijuana industry, with a felony on their record. And if you cannot start a pot shop in a state where it's legal to sell pot with a felony on your record, then we are keeping all of the people of color who are some of the greatest pot dealers in the world out of the system. We're keeping them poor, we're keeping them in prison, and we're keeping them out of the market on purpose. And as white people, we can't sit by and think that that's okay. And as liberals who smoke pot or don't smoke pot, we can't sit back and think that's okay, because it's not. And as a feminist, I cannot support an industry with such deep sexist roots, where lechery is rampant, where women, if you look online, women are used in bikinis and lingerie to sell marijuana. They are deemed only useful for being what they call a trim bitch in the fields. So in an industry in Northern California, women are brought in to trim, men are brought in to grow. Men grow, women trim. That's what's happening. And as a feminist and a leader in the social justice community, I cannot support an industry where women are continually locked out of the market because we have not addressed the issue that if women are dealing drugs, the likelihood of them having their children removed from their custody for dealing creates a silencing mechanism with them that makes them afraid of having their kids removed. So they don't have the money to buy into the capital because there's 8 guys who don't care about whether or not their kids get removed from custody because they're doing great. And Mel, I got a couple of essays I'm going to post on my all women, all leaders in the cannabis community, all who own their own businesses, who completely talk about the sexism in the industry, who are really not very pleased about it. And it's all women who sell marijuana. And they've had to found their own coalition to try and deal with the issue of women being Courtney, I can be more specific. There are a couple of essays that I'm going to put on my blog. One's from a woman who's been trimming up in Humboldt. She wrote it in 2016. It's about her experience as being her term, a trim bitch in Humboldt County, and other Mel. Yeah. So Courtney, Mel wants you to talk about how that's not entirely true. So I'm going to put a couple of essays up on my website. One's from a woman who is part of an organization in Colorado to bring more women together to talk about how to defeat the sexism that's happening, especially when they go to like the cannabis conventions and all of their experiences that they're having at the cannabis conventions and as sellers and as growers, and how complicated it's been for them to buy into the market because the market has been cornered by organizations like American, and they have cornered the market. And so it's nearly impossible for them to build the capital to buy into the system. Plus they have to defeat the other sexist stuff that literally these women who are running these businesses where they are bringing in good money are being groped. They're being harassed at the conventions where they're there to market their businesses. So Mel, I know you're saying that's not entirely true, but what I'm hearing for women, what I'm reading and what I'm seeing on all of the research that I've done, the sexism is problematic. And I'm not talking about medical marijuana. I know medical marijuana has a purpose. And I'm talking about the actual policy structure that is in place when we legalize marijuana. The policy structure says that, and Nikki, your friend who grew up in foster care who got a loan to start up a dispensary probably doesn't have any felonies on your record. If he would have to get those felonies expunged from his record if he had them to start his dispensary. And I'm sure he's been very successful, and that's fantastic. Like, I'm not trying to say nobody should be selling dope. Like, I'm not trying to say that. I used to smoke pot in high school. I understand. I totally get it. Okay? That's not the point. The point is that we are passing pieces of legislation that continues to support the prison industrial complex against people of color, and continue to support a complex that is inherently racist and sexist. And until we've passed policy, until these 8 guys, these guys right here who run American, until these guys go in and say, by the way, Colorado, you need to expunge everybody's records, let them out on restitution, and we're going to give them shares of our company so that they can buy into the market, then we're not doing anything. We're not doing anything to change the system. And that's my problem. I get the use of marijuana for medical purposes. I totally do. I even get it for recreational purposes. I totally do. I understand the need for alcohol. Trust me, I totally get this. I get it. But for people who smoke pot, for anxiety and PMS, for people who eat cookies, for people who give their kids that magical oil that stops their epileptic seizures, for all of those things, instead of advocating so hard for legalization, we need to be advocating so hard for legalization that includes expungement and restitution for every man and woman who is in prison for doing the same things that those 8 guys are doing. The people who are running dispensaries are doing the same thing that your average Black man in prison was doing to support his family in South Central Los Angeles, except for he's in prison and he's not being released. And yes, Courtney, there is definitely a monopoly run by those who have no care for people who paid the price prior. I totally agree with you. Yes. And I know that the market needs to be opened. I get it. But we can't do that while 8 men are becoming rich white billionaires all over the country. These guys are opening growing places in Massachusetts and California and Colorado. And we can't let those 8 men make all the money and not say something about it to our elected officials who are passing laws. That's my point. I don't want to get into the whole particulars about, and I'm happy to be educated. Don't get me wrong. My point is, if you support the legalization of marijuana, you have to support the expungement and restitution for people of color who are in prison for doing the same thing that white men are doing around this country. And I'm not the only one who said this. Jay-Z put out a really phenomenal video in the New York Times that I'm also linking in my blog, that I've linked to my blog before, about how people of color are still being targeted for arrests while white men are still making money. And until we shift that system, this is a social justice issue. This is not just an issue of legalizing marijuana. This is a social justice issue that attacks racism and sexism at a very fundamental level. And unless we are willing to have that conversation, hey Tara, how are you? Unless we are willing to have that conversation with the people around us who support the legalization of marijuana, we are not helping people get out of the system. We're keeping them poor, we're keeping them in prison, and we're keeping them out of the market. Courtney, you are correct about the people who are working in the fields. And it's mostly women. The thing that's super fascinating about this, and I will link a couple of articles to it, it's women who work in the fields, Courtney, which is really, really fascinating. Yes, Gail, it's going to take a long time. This is why I'm bringing it to everybody's attention. I know Jeff Sessions is an asshole. I know he supports the prison industrial complex. I know what he did with the Department of Justice and the Obama rules is really crappy and really bad. But this goes way beyond that. Because if we as liberals are going to be supporting an institution that legalizes a drug, then we have to also support the complete and total expungement and restitution for people who have lost wages from not being able to sell marijuana. Because what has happened is we put people in prison and they're not able to feed their families because they're not able to sell marijuana. And if we are keeping people from selling marijuana, then we are perpetuating a racist, sexist institution. And it isn't okay. And that is why I decided to go on a tirade. Not because Jeff Sessions is an asshole, because we all know Jeff Sessions is an asshole. We all know what he did is bad. But more than that, I've been saying this for years. If I have to call an elected official in Utah a couple of years ago because they were considering legalizing marijuana and say to her, you are a Latina woman, how can you support a bill like this without putting something in there for restitution and expungement of records for people who are Latino and Latina who have been arrested for doing the same exact thing that you're talking about? And she didn't know how to answer me. And that's why I'm saying you got to get in touch with your elected officials. If you support the legalization of marijuana, then get in touch with your elected officials and talk to them about how you also support the expungement of records and the release of people who are in prison for doing the same thing that these 8 guys who run American are doing. Because until that happens, it's super, super problematic on a justice level. And that's my challenge. It's my challenge to people who support the use of marijuana. And I know I'm going to come under fire, and I'm totally okay with that. Because I believe from a social justice perspective, we cannot sit by and be quiet about this. And if we're going to affect policy, and if we're going to advocate for policy change, then we have to talk about it in this way and not get locked into the minutia. And Mel, I really do hope you send me those articles about the toxicity of THC, because I'm still on the fence about that one, and I'm going to need a hell of a lot more research done by really good research organizations. And I hope that you all will really start to question this. I really hope that you all will start to look into this. And I will put as many links as I can because I have them all, and I'm going to add them to the blog today when I post the blog. And I hope that you continue to have this conversation either with me online or offline. I don't care. But, I really want to remind everybody that for what I am trying to get to is that if you're going to advocate for the legalization of marijuana, you have to advocate for the expungement and the release of everybody's records. I know you are, Mel. I know. Give it all to me, and I will post it all on my website. I still won't change my mind about the justice issue. I absolutely will not. Because for me, it's critical. It's a critical piece. And we have to combat the racism and sexism in the marijuana industry, because that is how we're going to fuck shit up, y'all.